The last customer had long gone, and the only sound in Tasty Diner was the squeak of Betty's rag as she wiped down the booths. She liked these quiet moments after closing, when the world felt still. But tonight, the silence was broken by a different sound, a muffled, frantic banging coming from the back. Her first thought was the old pipes, but then she heard it, a small, terrified voice, crying for help. Her heart jumped into her throat. She dropped the rag and ran towards the noise, her sneakers slipping on the greasy tile. The sound was coming from the giant walk-in freezer. She yanked on the heavy handle, but it didn't budge. It was locked from the outside. The large metal pin slid securely into place. "Hello? Is someone in there?" she called out, her voice shaking. "Help me, please. It's so cold," a young boy's voice wailed from the other side of the thick door. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Betty. It was Avron, the sweet little boy who had been in for dinner with his babysitter hours ago. The babysitter must have left, thinking the boy had gone to the bathroom, and Avron must have wandered in and gotten locked. Betty pulled on the handle with all her might, throwing her whole weight against the steel door. It was useless. She was too small, too weak. "Avron, it's Betty, the waitress. I'm here. I'm going to get you out," she promised, her mind racing. She looked around for a tool, a key, anything. There was nothing. The banging from inside was getting more desperate, and his cries were turning into shivering sobs. Time was running out. Her eyes scanned the floor, praying for an idea, and that's when she saw it. A little paper napkin, half-trodden and greasy, was lying near the freezer door. She snatched it up. On it, in a child's messy scribble, was a phone number. Above it said, "Papa." Her hands trembled so badly she could barely punch the numbers into her phone. It rang once, twice. Then click. A voice, deep and rough as gravel, answered. It wasn't a greeting. It was a single, dangerous word. "Speak." For a second, Betty forgot how to form words. Hello? Is this Avron's father? The silence on the other end was heavier than any sound. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, each syllable dripping with icy authority. "My name is Betty. I'm a waitress at Tasty Diner. Your son, Avron, he's locked in the freezer. I can't get him out. He's screaming for help." The words tumbled out in a terrified rush. There was no gasp, no cry of panic. Just a deadly calm that was somehow more frightening. "The address. Now." She stammered out the restaurant's location. "Don't move. Don't call anyone else." The line went dead. Betty stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end hadn't sounded worried. It had sounded like a command from a king. She rushed back to the freezer door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. "Avron, your papa is coming. He's on his way," she said, trying to sound brave. The sobs from inside quieted to whimpers. Less than 3 minutes later, the front door of the restaurant exploded inward. Not opened, splintered off its hinges. A giant of a man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the streetlights outside. He was handsome in a sharp, terrifying way, like a statue carved from marble and shadow. But his eyes, a stormy gray, swept the room and landed on her, and they were the coldest things she had ever seen. 2 other people moved with him like shadows. A serious-faced woman with dark hair named Angeline, who immediately began checking the room, and a hulking man named Frank, who looked like he could break the freezer door with his bare hands. The giant, Nicholas Salvatore, strode toward her. He didn't ask questions. "Where?" Betty just pointed a shaking finger toward the back. He was past her in an instant. Frank didn't bother with the lock. He took a small, heavy tool from his pocket, wedged it into the doorframe, and with a grunt and a screech of tearing metal, he ripped the entire mechanism loose. The door swung open. A small, shivering form tumbled out into the light. "Avron." Nicholas dropped to one knee, catching his son in a powerful embrace. For a single, fleeting moment, as he held the boy, the ice in his eyes melted, revealing a raw, desperate love that took Betty's breath away. But as Avron's shivers subsided, Nicholas's gaze lifted and locked onto Betty. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating suspicion. He stood up, Avron now clinging to his neck. You, he said, his voice low. You found him. You called. Betty could only nod, wrapping her arms around herself. He looked her up and down, from her simple waitress uniform to her frightened eyes. A boy gets locked in. A waitress just happens to find my private number. A number very few people have. He took a step closer, and Betty felt an instinctual urge to step back. This seems like a very convenient story. Her eyes widened. You think I? I would never. He was crying, he was so scared. Or it was a very good performance to get my attention, he interrupted, his voice silken and dangerous. To get close to me. Tears of frustration welled in Betty's eyes. How could he think that? How could anyone be so cruel? He watched her cry, his expression unreadable. Then he seemed to come to a decision. Avron needs a new nanny. The last one was unreliable. You will take the job. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Betty stared at him, stunned. Go home with this man? This terrifying man who thought she was a criminal? I have my job here, she whispered. You don't anymore, Nicholas stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will live in my home. You will care for my son. And I will be watching your every move. Betty thought of her tiny, lonely apartment, her mountain of bills, the struggle of every single day. This was insane. It was terrifying. But the money, the security, and little Avron, who was now looking at her with wide, trusting eyes over his father's shoulder. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. It felt like she was stepping off a cliff. She took a shaky breath and gave a single, nervous nod. Okay. A flicker of something, satisfaction, crossed Nicholas's face. Without another word, he turned, his long coat sweeping behind him, and walked out of the broken restaurant, his son in his arms. Angeline gestured for Betty to follow. As she stepped out into the cool night air, leaving her old life behind in the shattered doorway, she had no idea that her real story was just beginning. 4 weeks, Betty lived within its high walls of Salvatore's mansion, following a strict routine of caring for Avron under the watchful eyes of the guards and the cold, distant gaze of Nicholas. He was a ghost in his own home, appearing for brief meals where he spoke little, his stormy eyes often lingering on her with a mix of suspicion and something else she couldn't name. Avron was her only joy. The little boy clung to her, his laughter echoing through the grand, silent halls. It was during one of these laughter-filled afternoons, playing in the sprawling backyard, that the world exploded. It started with the crunch of metal and the shatter of glass. A black van had rammed the back of the town car as they were returning from the park. Before Betty could even scream, men with masks poured out, their guns looking alien and terrifying in the bright sunlight. Get down! Nicholas's voice was not a shout, but a low, powerful command that cut through the chaos. In one fluid motion, he shoved Betty and Avron to the floor of the car, his own body shielding them. The air filled with loud, popping sounds. Frank, in the front seat, was already firing back, his face a mask of cold focus. Betty squeezed her eyes shut, clutching a sobbing Avron. She heard grunts, the thud of bodies, and Nicholas's sharp, efficient movements. He wasn't just giving orders, he was in the fight, a predator unleashed. When she dared to peek, she saw him disarm a man with a brutal, precise twist of his wrist, the crack of bones sickeningly clear. He moved with a terrifying grace she had never seen, a side of him that was all danger and deadly skill. It was over in minutes. The attackers lay subdued or fled. Silence returned, heavy and thick with the smell of gun smoke and fear. That night, tucked safely in the mansion, the brave front Betty had put on for Avron crumbled. Alone in her lavish room, she sank to the floor, trembling. The images replayed behind her eyes, the guns, the violence, Nicholas's fierce protection. Sobs racked her body, the terror of the day finally consuming her. She didn't hear her door open. A shadow fell over her. Betty! She looked up, tears streaming down her face, to find Nicholas standing there. The cold, untouchable boss was gone. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his expression was unreadable. He didn't say a word. He simply knelt and gathered her into his arms. It was not a gentle hug. It was a claiming. His arms were strong, solid, wrapping around her shaking form and pulling her against the hard wall of his chest. The feeling was electric, a jolt of pure, warm safety that silenced her tears. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her cheek, a rhythm that steadied her own. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. Betty melted into the embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt. All the suspicion, all the distance, evaporated in that single, charged moment. She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes searching his. His gaze dropped to her lips. Then he was kissing her. It wasn't a gentle, questioning kiss. It was passionate, desperate, and full of a hunger they had both been denying. It was a silent confession in the dark, a promise and a question all at once. For that endless moment, he wasn't a mafia boss and she wasn't a waitress. They were just a man and a woman, forgetting everything but the feel of each other. After that night, a new, secret world opened within the mansion. When Avron was asleep and the guards were at their posts, Nicholas would find her. Their secret romance bloomed in whispered conversations in the library, in stolen, spicy moments in shadowy corridors where his hands would learn the curves of her body and her lips would trace the line of his jaw. He began to talk to her, really talk. He told her about the weight of his legacy, the loneliness of his power. This life, it's a cage I was born into, he confessed one night, his voice a low rumble in the dark. I never knew there could be softness in it. Until you. He showed her a heart that wasn't just tough, but tender for her alone. He made her feel not just safe, but cherished in a way she had never dreamed possible. But the outside world was never far. Angeline, ever watchful, pulled Betty aside one day. He cares for you, she said, her voice low and serious. And that is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a man like him. This love, it makes him vulnerable. It makes you a target. Be careful, Betty. This fairy tale has monsters. Betty nodded, but the warning was a distant echo drowned out by the sound of her own heart. A week later, Nicholas blindfolded her. Trust me, was all he said. He led her into a car, and when the cloth was removed, she gasped. They were on a private hilltop, the entire city glittering like a carpet of diamonds below them. A blanket was spread with food, and candles flickered in the gentle breeze. It was a world away from the danger and the high walls. Under a sky dusted with a million stars, Nicholas took her hands. You changed everything, Betty, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart soar. You and Avron, you are my real life. The only one that matters. He took a small, velvet box from his pocket. I am going to leave all of this behind. For us. For our family. He opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring sparkled, catching the starlight. Marry me. Let me spend forever making you feel as loved as you have made me. Tears of pure, untainted joy filled Betty's eyes. This was it. The happy ending. The dangerous past was behind them, and a beautiful future shone brighter than the city lights below. Yes, she breathed, her voice full of certainty. Yes, Nicholas. Forever. As he slid the ring onto her finger, she believed with all her heart that their story was just beginning, and it would be a perfect one. She had no idea the final, shocking page was already being written. Betty was in an elegant boutique that was a world of silk and satin, a far cry from Betty's old life. She floated between the racks, her engagement ring catching the light. For the first time, she was choosing a dress not as a nanny, but as the future Mrs. Salvatore. She held up a sleek, crimson gown, imagining Nicholas's eyes darkening with approval. It suits you, a soft, aged voice said behind her. Betty turned. An old man with kind eyes and a weathered face stood there. He had a gentle smile, but it didn't reach the sadness in his gaze. Thank you, Betty said, polite but cautious. You have her smile, the man continued, his voice nostalgic. Your mother, Clara. Betty's blood ran cold. You knew my parents? I was their accountant. Your father, Robert, was my best friend. The man's smile faded completely. He built his hardware business from nothing. He was so proud. Then the Salvatores came. The name landed like a physical blow. Betty's grip tightened on the dress hanger. A young Nicholas, eager to prove himself to his father, wanted the land our store was on, the man explained, his voice dropping. Robert refused to sell. So, Nicholas didn't just make an offer. He made an example. He had his men trash the storefront night after night. He threatened their suppliers. He spread vicious lies that ruined their reputation. Within 6 months, the bank foreclosed. The Salvatores bought the property for pennies. He pulled a folded, yellowed envelope from his inner pocket. Your parents never recovered. The shame, the debt, it consumed them. They died in a car accident a year later, but everyone who knew them knew it was a broken heart that truly killed them. With trembling hands, Betty took the envelope. Inside were faded photographs of her parents' thriving store, followed by grainy shots of the smashed windows. There were copies of official-looking documents, loan denials, the foreclosure notice. The final paper was a brief, local news article about the tragic, untimely death of Robert and Clara Miller. The world tilted. The luxurious boutique, the expensive dress, the ring on her finger, it all turned to ash. The man who held her at night, who promised her a future, was the same one who had systematically destroyed her past. The love she felt was built on the grave of her parents' dreams. Why are you telling me this now? Betty whispered, her voice hollow. Because you are about to marry the man who murdered them, just as surely as if he put a gun to their heads, the man said gently. I couldn't let you do it in ignorance. He left her there, standing amidst the finery, her future shattered. The diamond on her finger felt like a brand of betrayal. Somehow, she made it back to the mansion. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, the documents burning a hole in her purse. When Nicholas found her, she was staring out the window of her room. You're quiet, my love, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His touch, once her greatest comfort, now made her skin crawl. Wedding nerves. She forced her body to relax against his, a perfect, beautiful lie. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, manufacturing a tearful, overwhelmed smile. It's all so perfect. It's everything I've ever wanted. He kissed her forehead, completely fooled. It's only the beginning. The lie became her armor. She played her part flawlessly. She oohed and ahed at the wedding plans, smiled for the photographers, and accepted the congratulations of dangerous men and their elegant wives. She was the blushing, happy bride, and Nicholas, the powerful king, was utterly enchanted by his queen. He decided the public proposal wasn't enough. He wanted to claim her properly in front of the entire city. He planned a grand engagement gala at the city's most opulent hotel. The ballroom was a sea of the city's most powerful and dangerous people. Under the glittering cascade of 1,000 crystal lights, with everyone watching, Nicholas took her hand. I have already asked you in private, he said, his voice echoing in the sudden hush. But I want the world to know. Betty, you are my life. My future. My family. He didn't get down on one knee. He stood tall, a king proclaiming his choice to his kingdom. He looked at her, his stormy eyes full of a love that was now a poison to her. The crowd held its breath. Betty looked out at the sea of faces, rivals, allies, sharks who smelled blood in the water. She then looked back at Nicholas, the man who had orphaned her. She let a single perfect tear of joy slide down her cheek. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent room. My family. The crowd erupted in cheers. Nicholas pulled her into a triumphant kiss, and she kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her shattered heart and burning rage into the performance. It was the best acting of her life. The wedding day was a spectacle. The cathedral was packed. Every criminal kingpin, every corrupt official, every society matron was there to witness the unification of the Salvatore Empire with its new, innocent heart. Nicholas stood at the altar, impeccable in his tuxedo, a look of proud, possessive anticipation on his face. The organ music swelled. All heads turned to the back of the church. The doors remained closed. A minute passed. Then two. A nervous whisper began to ripple through the pews. Nicholas's smile tightened. Frank, standing as his best man, shifted uncomfortably. Then a side door opened. A young altar boy, looking confused, hurried down the aisle and handed a single, folded piece of paper to Frank. Frank's face went pale as he read it. He handed it to Nicholas. Nicholas unfolded the note. The words were written in a calm, precise hand he knew so well. "You took my family. Now I take your honor." The paper crumpled in his fist. The ice-cold rage that settled on his features was more terrifying than any shouted curse. He slowly lifted his head and scanned the crowd, his enemies smirking, his allies looking away in shame. He had been brought to his knees not by a bullet or a rival, but by the woman he loved. He had been left at the altar, humiliated in front of everyone who mattered, his power shown to be a hollow joke. He turned to Frank, his voice a low, deadly whisper that cut through the stunned silence. "Find her. I don't care how long it takes." At that exact moment, high above the clouds, Betty looked out the window of a plane. The city that housed her gilded cage, her beautiful nightmare, shrunk to a tiny speck of light below. She wasn't crying. Her face was a mask of calm resolve and her heart was a stone in her chest. She had destroyed the mafia boss, but she had also destroyed the only man she had ever loved. And as the plane flew into the unknown, she knew that this love story was far from over. Her revenge was just starting, and she'd be back to ruin Nicholas piece by piece. If you enjoy this story, kindly show us some love by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section. See you in the next video above.